Hello, my dear friends. The first thing you notice isn't the dark, or the cold that seeps up through the floorboards, but the taste. It's the phantom sensation of raw flour coating your tongue, a gritty film that has settled in your mouth while you slept. This is the Paris of the Middle Ages, long before it was a city of lights and romance and you are a baker, a boulanger. And while the idea might conjure images of cheerful men in white aprons pulling golden loaves from a rustic oven, the truth is a far dustier and more exhausting reality. You probably wouldn't survive a week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let your own world fade away for a while. Imagine yourself in a small, cramped room, the air thick with the ghosts of 1,000 past bakings. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The darkness is absolute. No gentle blue light of pre-dawn filters through your window, because your window is little more than a shuttered slit in the wall, covered with a piece of oiled parchment that does little to keep out the chill. The year is 1380, and the hour is 4 in the morning. For the nobles and wealthy merchants across the city, this is the dead of night, a time of deep, secure sleep. For you, it is the beginning of the day. You don't need a rooster to tell you it's time to rise. The dread in the pit of your stomach is a far more reliable alarm. You swing your legs out of bed, the rough woolen blanket scratching against your skin, and your bare feet meet the splintery wooden floor. The cold is a physical shock, a jolt that travels up your spine, but you are used to it. What you will never get used to is the dust. This is the central truth of your life, the sensory anchor of your entire existence, flour. It's not the pleasant, clean, white powder you might picture in a modern kitchen. This flour is a living entity, a relentless invader. It's a fine, greyish mist that hangs in the air of your small apartment above the bakery. It coats every surface in a uniform, ghostly film. When you run a finger over the small wooden chest that holds your family's few possessions, it comes away white. The water in the basin by the bed has a pale skim on its surface. When you cough, a little puff of it escapes your lips. It is the taste on your tongue, the grit in your eyes, and the constant, dry tickle in the back of your throat. Glamorous illusion of your profession is one of warmth, of community, of providing the very stuff of life. Poets might write of the noble baker, rising with the lark to feed the city. They imagine the heavenly scent of baking bread wafting through the morning streets, a symbol of hearth and home. They see you as a master of a comforting, almost magical art. But the shocking reality, here in the biting, 4 in the morning cold, is that your life is one of grim, suffocating routine. The smell in this room is not of baked bread, but of raw grain, yeast, and stale sweat. It's the smell of labor, heavy and unchanging. You are not a magician, you are a tradesman, bound to a wheel of endless, back-breaking work, and the magic is simply surviving until nightfall. And why? Why this brutal schedule? The logic is simple and unforgiving. The city of Paris is a vast, hungry beast, and it demands fresh bread the moment it awakens. The gentry want their soft, white manchet loaves for their breakfast table. The merchants and artisans want their hearty brown bread to see them through the day. The poor want whatever cheap, dark loaf they can afford to stave off hunger. To meet this demand, the process must begin now. The great brick oven, the monstrous heart of your bakery, is cold. It will take hours of precious firewood to bring it to the ferocious, even heat required for a proper bake. The duff, your primary charge, needs time to be mixed, kneaded, and, most importantly, to rise. There are no shortcuts, no modern yeasts to speed the process. Everything happens on a timetable dictated by physics and biology, not by your own comfort. To fail, to have your bread late, or of poor quality, is not just a disappointment, it is financial ruin. You pull on your clothes in the dark, not wanting to waste a candle. A linen shirt and woolen breeches, both stiff and smelling faintly of smoke and old perspiration. They too feel gritty with flour. Beside you, your wife stirs. Her breathing is soft, but you can hear the same faint, dry rasp in her chest that you feel in your own. She will join you soon, her role just as vital, though far less celebrated. In the corner, on a small straw pallet, your children sleep. A boy and a girl. They are already breathing the dust that defines your life. You look at your son, his small chest rising and falling, and you feel a pang of something complex pride and a deep, aching sorrow. This will be his life. 2. This same cold, this same darkness, this same dust. You move quietly down the narrow, treacherous wooden stairs that lead directly into the bakehouse. The air grows thicker here, the smell of raw flour more potent. The space is dominated by two things: the massive, dark maw of the oven, and the huge wooden kneading trough, which looks like a coffin in the gloom. Your first task is to coax the oven to life. You unbar the heavy iron door, its hinges groaning in protest. Inside, it is a black cavern of soot-stained brick. You lay the kindling with the careful, practiced hand of a master, arranging the logs of wood just so. Every piece of firewood costs money, and you cannot afford to waste a single twig. When you finally strike a spark from your flint and steel, the tiny flame seems impossibly fragile in the vast, cold darkness. You nurse it, blowing gently, feeding it scraps until it catches, and the first hint of warmth begins to push back against the oppressive chill. As the fire grows, it casts dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls, making the familiar shapes of your tools, peels, the scales, the baskets look alien and menacing. This fire is your livelihood, but it is also a constant danger. A single stray spark could turn your entire world to ash. For now, it is your first victory of the day. The oven is breathing. Soon, you will have to wake the duff. But you know you do not do this alone. Your every move, from the quality of your flour to the weight of your loaves, is scrutinized by a power far greater than any single customer, the guild. As the nascent fire begins to warm the bricks of the oven, your thoughts turn from the immediate physical tasks to the invisible structure that governs your every move. It's a force more powerful than the city guard, and more demanding than the king's tax collector. It is the Guild of Bakers, the Talmaliers of Paris. This isn't a choice, not a club you can opt out of. To sell bread in this city is to be a member, and to be a member is to be owned by the collective. The glamorous illusion, the one sold to the public and enshrined in royal charters, is that the guild is a mark of honor and a guarantee of quality. It's a brotherhood, they say, a community of masters dedicated to upholding the sacred craft of baking. They are the guardians of the city's bread, ensuring that every Parisian, from the highest noble to the lowliest laborer, receives a fair and wholesome loaf. To the outside world, your membership signifies that you are trustworthy, skilled, and respectably a pillar of the community. The guild's seal on a document is meant to be as good as gold. But as you stand in the flickering firelight of your own bakery, you know the shocking, flour-dusted reality. The guild is not a brotherhood. It is a cage. A very expensive cage. The price of entry alone was enough to put you in debt for a decade. It was a sum that could have bought a small farm, paid in a clinking, nerve-wracking pile of silver coins to the guild masters in their grand hallmen whose soft hands and clean clothes stood in stark contrast to the flour-caked apprentices they governed. And the fee was just the beginning. The guild's control is absolute, strangling any hope of innovation or personal flair. They dictate the type of flour you can use, the merchants you must buy it from, and the price you must pay for it. They set the exact weight and price for over a dozen different kinds of bread, from the airy white pain de Chailly for the rich to the coarse, dark pain de Brode for the poor. If you were to have a brilliant idea, new way of mixing, a different blend of grains, it would be seen not as inspiration, but as rebellion. You remember your own initiation. A far cry from a welcoming ceremony. It was a hidden, almost menacing ritual. You stood before the guild masters, your heart hammering against your ribs, and swore a series of oaths. You swore on a holy relic, a supposed sliver of bone from Saint Honor, the patron saint of bakers, to uphold the guild's statutes. But you also swore other, darker oaths. You swore to watch your fellow bakers, your neighbors, your supposed brothers. You swore to report anyone caught using an illegal flour source or baking on a forbidden day, or, worst of all, using false weights. The ceremony ended not with a handshake, but with you plunging your right hand into a basin of fine, white flour, sealing your oath with the very substance that would define and dominate your life. You became, in that moment, both a prisoner and a guard, perpetually watching and being watched. The entire system is built on a foundation of mutual suspicion. So why this oppressive control? Why would the king and the city officials empower such a restrictive monopoly? The logic, from their perspective, is ruthlessly practical. Firstly, it's about control and taxation. A city of 1,000 individual, competing bakers is an administrative nightmare. A single, powerful guild, however, is easy to manage. The guild collects fees from its members, and the crown takes a hefty cut of those fees. The guild enforces the rules, and the crown can hold the guild masters responsible if the rules are broken. More importantly, in a city perpetually on the brink of unrest, bread is politics. A shortage of bread, or a sudden spike in its price, could and often did lead to riots in the streets. By giving the guild a monopoly, the authorities make them responsible for keeping the city fed and pacified. The guild's strict rules are presented as a guarantee of public safety, a way to protect the people from dishonest bakers. But you know the truth, it's a tool for social and economic pacification, ensuring the powerful stay powerful and the system, however unjust, remains intact. The promise of protection is a convenient fiction for the reality of extortion. You are not just a baker, you are a cog in a vast machine of control, greased with flour and fueled by fear. The fear of the guild's inspectors, who can burst in at any moment, their noses twitching, ready to test your scales, weigh your loaves and plunge their hands into your flour bins, checking its texture and color for any sign of adulteration. The fine for a minor infraction could erase a week's profit. A major one could see you humiliated, your shop shuttered, your name disgraced. Expulsion is a professional death sentence. You would be cast out, unable to legally practice your trade anywhere in the Kingdom of France. So you obey. You follow the rules, you keep your head down, and you bake the bread you are told to bake. But there is one part of your process, one element of your craft, that the guild cannot entirely standardize or control. It is the living heart of your bakery, a secret passed down from your father, just as his father passed it down to him. It sits now in a clay pot in the corner, waiting. It is your sword of starter, your levain, and it is a far more ancient and temperamental master than the guild could ever be. The fire in the oven is now a steady, hungry roar, and the bakehouse is beginning to shed its bone-deep chill, replaced by a dry, radiating heat. It's time. Time to awaken the most important member of your household. Tucked away in a corner, far from any drafts, but close enough to the oven's growing warmth, is a squat earthenware crock covered with a damp, slightly grey cloth. To an outsider, it looks like nothing more than a pot of forgotten porridge. For you, it is the soul of your business. It is your levain, the sourdough mother. The glamorous illusion surrounding this process is one of ancient, almost mystical tradition. This is the sacred heirloom, the living link to generations of bakers who came before you. It is a bubbling, breathing culture of wild yeasts and bacteria, a captured piece of Paris very air, carefully nurtured and passed down from father to son. Poets would call it the spark of life, the magical ingredient that transforms a dead lump of flour and water into light, airy and flavorful bread. It is your family's unique signature, the secret that makes your bread different from the bakers 2 streets over. It is a symbol of continuity, heritage, and the pure, natural art of baking. But as you lift the damp cloth, the shocking reality assaults your senses. The smell is not the clean, tangy aroma of a modern sourdough. It is a pungent, aggressively sour, almost alcoholic funk, with an undercurrent of something vaguely like old cheese. The surface of the thick, greyish paste is bubbly, yes, but it is also streaked with darker, unidentifiable flecks. You know from experience that if you neglect it for even a day too long, a skin of greenish or even pinkish mold can form, which must be carefully scraped away. This revered family secret is, in truth, a temperamental and profoundly unhygienic concoction. It is a delicate ecosystem that can be easily thrown into chaos. A change in the weather, a different batch of flour, a bit too much warmth, or a moment of neglect can turn it sickly and weak or murderously sour. There are no thermometers, no strips, no scientific understanding of what is happening in that pot. There is only instinct, smell, and a kind of desperate, prayerful ritual. You feed it a scoop of fresh flour and some lukewarm water, stirring it with a special wooden paddle, the same paddle your father used, its handle worn smooth by his hand, its end permanently stained and impregnated with the starter. You would never admit it to a customer, or even to a fellow baker, but you live in constant, low-grade fear of your levain dying. Its death would be catastrophic, far worse than a failed batch of dough. It would mean the severing of that link to the past, the loss of your bakery's unique character. You would have to beg a piece from another baker, a deep humiliation, or attempt to start a new one from scratch, a process that is as much luck as it is skill, taking weeks of nurturing a slurry of flour and water, hoping the right invisible spirits take up residence. You remember a story your father told you, of a rival baker whose starter went bad. The man's bread became flat, sour, and inedible. His customers vanished. Within a month, his shop was shuttered, and he left the city in disgrace. The story was told as a cautionary tale, a reminder that this pot of bubbling goo was a fickle deity that demanded constant worship. The why behind this reliance on such a primitive and unpredictable method is simple. There was no alternative. Commercial yeasts were centuries in the future. The only way to leaven bread on this scale was with a sourdough culture or, in some cases, by using the foamy barm skimmed from the top of fermenting ale from a local brewer. But barm could be inconsistent and impart a beery flavour to the bread. Well-maintained levain was the mark of a superior baker. This was the pinnacle of leavening technology. The belief system of the time didn't see the starter as a collection of microorganisms. They saw it as a singular, living essence. It had a spirit, a temperament. You had to treat it with respect, to listen to it. Its sour smell and questionable appearance weren't seen as unhygienic, they were signs of its potency, its vitality. A starter that was too clean or mild was likely weak and ineffective. The funk was the magic. The slightly slimy texture was evidence of its life force. This acceptance of what we would consider contamination was part of a broader worldview, one that did not understand germ theory and saw the world as a place governed by humours, spirits and mysterious essences. You scoop out a large portion of the now awakened, bubbling mother duff and carry it to the massive wooden trough. This is the moment of creation. Into the trough goes the starter, followed by sack after sack of flour, hauled on your aching back from the storeroom. Then comes the water, carried in heavy wooden buckets from the public well down the street. And now, the true labour begins. You climb into the trough, your bare feet sinking into the cold, sticky mass. You begin to knead with your feet and legs, stomping and turning, a slow, grueling dance. The dough is heavy and resistant. Your muscles scream in protest. Sweat begins to bead on your forehead, dripping down your face and into the mixture. You are not just mixing duff, you are becoming part of it. As you work, your mind drifts to the people who will eventually buy these loaves, the citizens of Paris. They will come to your shop window in a few hours, their faces a mixture of hope and suspicion, demanding their daily bread while secretly wondering if you're the honest baker you pretend to be. Hours have passed in a blur of sweat, heat, and relentless physical effort. The duff, having been kneaded, has risen in its great trough, been punched down, and is now portioned out onto a long, flour-dusted wooden table. Your hands, raw and chapped, move with an economy of motion born of 1,000 repetitions, shaping the sticky masses into the specific forms demanded by the guild: round country loaves, long tards, small rolls for the wealthy. The oven is now a roaring inferno, its white-hot breath pulsing into the bakehouse. The first batches are in, and the air is finally filled with that redeeming, glorious smell of baking bread, a scent so powerful it almost makes you forget the aches in your back and the grit in your lungs. This is the moment of transformation, when you transition from a labourer into a merchant. You wipe your hands on your apron, leaving yet another white handprint, and prepare to face the public. Glamorous illusion is that of the beloved shopkeeper, the cornerstone of the neighbourhood. You are the man who provides sustenance, whose shop is a hub of morning gossip and community. Your customers greet you by name. They smile, they trust you. The exchange of coin for a warm loaf is supposed to be a simple, honest transaction, a daily ritual that reinforces the bonds of society. Your shop window, stacked with golden brown loaves, is a portrait of abundance and integrity. But as you unbar the heavy wooden shutter that serves as your shop window, you brace yourself for the shocking reality. The faces that greet you are not filled with simple, friendly trust. They are sharp, calculating, and deeply suspicious. Every customer who approaches is, on some level, your adversary. They see you not as a friendly neighbour, but as a potential thief. The most common accusation, whispered in the markets and shouted during arguments, is that bakers are cheats. They believe you use false weights, that your scales have been cunningly tampered with to make a loaf seem heavier than it is. They suspect you of adulterating your flour, mixing in cheaper substances like ground beans, chalk, or even sawdust to stretch your expensive grain and increase your profits. Their smiles are thin, their eyes narrow as they watch you select a loaf, their gaze flicking from the bread to your hands to the scales on the counter, searching for any hint of deception. The morning's first transaction is not a pleasantry. It is a challenge. A woman with a worn shawl points to a loaf. A full-weight one, mind you, she says, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. You know that if her loaf feels even slightly light when she gets it home, she will be back, and she will not be quiet about her complaint. This deeply ingrained suspicion wasn't just paranoia, it was rooted in a grim historical reality. The why is that baker fraud was, in fact, rampant. In a trade with tight margins, crushing guild fees and fluctuating grain prices, the temptation to cheat was immense. An extra pinch of alum could make bread unnaturally white and heavy, fooling the eye and the scales. A bit of boiled potato or mashed beans mixed into the dough was almost impossible to detect by taste, but added significant weight and volume. Some bakers were caught with 2 sets of scales, an honest one for when the inspectors were near and a cheater's scale for daily business. Authorities took this crime incredibly seriously, not because they cared about the nutritional value of the bread, but, as we discussed, because bread prices were politically explosive. The crime of selling an underweight loaf, known as light bread, was met with punishments that were both cruel and theatrical. A convicted baker could be fined an exorbitant sum. For repeat offences, they could be subjected to the baker's hurdle, a humiliating public punishment where they were tied to a wooden sledge with their light loaf hanging around their neck and dragged through the muddy, jeering streets of their own neighbourhood. The shame was a powerful deterrent, but the poverty that drove the crime was even more powerful. So, you live in this state of performative honesty. You handle your scales with an exaggerated delicacy, making sure the customer can see the needle clearly. You smack the flour from your hands before picking up their coin, so no one can accuse you of short-changing them with a dusty palm. You affect a demeanour of weary sincerity, the honest craftsman beleaguered by the sins of his less scrupulous brethren. It is a constant, draining performance. Your entire livelihood depends on projecting an image of integrity that your own customers are predisposed to disbelieve. They are trapped by their need for your product, and you are trapped by their suspicion. The relationship is symbiotic and toxic. The greatest focus of their desire and therefore their suspicion is the pinnacle of your craft, the bread that separates the rich from everyone else. It sits on the highest shelf, a beacon of pale, delicate perfection, the white loaf. They stare at it with a mixture of aspiration and resentment, never knowing the ugly truth behind its creation. On the top shelf of your stall, set apart from the hearty, brown bulls and the dark, dense loaves of rye, sits the prize of your collection, the pain de chali or the manchet. This is the white loaf, the bread of nobles and wealthy merchants. Its crust is a pale, delicate gold, and its crumb, is as white as freshly fallen snow and as soft as a lady's glove. The glamorous illusion of this bread is absolute. It is the ultimate symbol of purity, refinement, and status. To eat white bread was to proclaim your distance from the soil, from the dirty, earthy labour of the fields. Brown bread was for brown hands, for peasants who toiled in the dirt. White bread was for the pale, delicate hands of the elite, for those who did not need to worry about the bran and chaff that filled the loaves of the common folk. This loaf is an edible advertisement of wealth. Its very existence on a dinner table was a statement that its owner could afford not just bread, but the most inefficient, labour-intensive, and exclusive kind of bread possible. It was, in short, a food of fantasy, representing a clean, pure, and effortless life. But as you handle one of these loaves, its surprising weight in your hands, you know the shocking reality behind its pristine appearance. This bread is a lie. Its whiteness is not the result of some magical grain or a purified baking process. It is born from immense labour and, often, dangerous deception. First, the flour itself. To produce flour white enough for these loaves, the grain must be sifted and bolted through fine linen cloths, over and over again. This is a grueling, exhausting task, usually performed by the lowest-ranking apprentices. They would spend hours in a small, enclosed room, shaking heavy sieves, the air so thick with the finest, most invasive flour dust that they were often called bolting hutch ghosts. They were immerged-coated head to toe in a spectral white powder, coughing and spitting, the dust clinging to their eyelashes and filling their lungs. For every sack of this refined white flour, 2 or 3 sacks of bran, germ, and darker flour were left behind, the very parts containing most of the nutrients. This pure flour was nutritionally inferior, but that was the point. It was pure of labour, pure of the earth. Deception, however, ran deeper. Even with the most rigorous sifting, the flour often retained a yellowish or greyish cast. To achieve the coveted, almost supernatural whiteness, some unscrupulous bakers turned to additives. The most common was alum, a chemical compound we now know as a hydrated potassium aluminum sulfate. A small amount of alum mixed into the dough would bleach the flour, strengthen the gluten to produce a lighter, airier loaf, and, crucially, helped the bread retain water, making it heavier. Heavier bread meant more profit. Customers who bought these loaves were paying a premium for bread that was not only less nutritious, but was also laced with a harsh astringent. Chalk dust, bone ash, and even powdered lime were also sometimes used to improve the color and weight. The beautiful white loaf, that symbol of aristocratic purity, was often a chemical cocktail, a masterpiece of adulteration that looked perfect but was a sham down to its very molecules. So why would anyone desire such a thing? And why was this deception so common? The logic is wrapped in the medieval concept of class and aesthetics. The worldview of the time was deeply hierarchical, and this hierarchy extended to food. Whiteness and lightness were associated with the heavens, with angels, with the spirit, and therefore with the aristocracy. Darkness and heaviness were associated with the earth, with manual labor, with the body, and thus with the peasantry. Eating white bread was a way of performing your social status, of physically ingesting your own superiority. It was a form of conspicuous consumption, demonstrating you could afford to waste the majority of the grain's nutritional value simply for a preferred color and texture. The bakers, caught between the nobility's demand for this impossible standard of whiteness and the economic reality of their trade, were incentivized to find shortcuts. The system all but demanded fraud. The authorities might occasionally crack down on adulteration, but the social pressure from wealthy clients to produce the whitest bread imaginable was constant. They were fulfilling a demand that was, by its very nature, based on an illusion. The pure white loaf was not a wholesome food, it was a piece of social theatre, and you were its begrudging stagehand. As you sell one to a merchant's wife, wrapped carefully in a clean cloth, you see the pride in her eyes. She is buying status. You are selling her a beautifully crafted lie, a lie baked in the ferocious, ever-present heart of your operation, the oven itself, which tolerates no mistakes and offers no second chances. The sun is higher in the sky now, and the bakehouse is a sweltering pit of heat. Sweat runs in salty rivers down your back and forehead. The source of this oppressive warmth is the massive brick and stone structure that dominates the entire space, your oven. It is the heart, the engine, and the altar of your trade. The glamorous illusion of the baker's oven is one of rustic charm and cozy warmth. It's the centerpiece of a romantic fantasy, a great, friendly giant with a smiling, arched opening from which you pull perfectly browned loaves with a long wooden peel. It represents hearth and home, the magical transformation of simple dough into life-giving bread. In songs and stories, the oven is a benevolent force, a symbol of bounty and the comforting glow of a well-run household. It is the visual anchor of the cheerful, idealized bakery, radiating a gentle heat that welcomes all who draw near. Its fire is a controlled, domestic flame, a servant to your craft. You pause for a moment to wipe your brow with the back of a floury hand, and you stare into the oven's opening. The shocking reality is that this structure is not a friendly giant, it is a monster you have chained in your home. The heat it radiates is not gentle, it is a suffocating, relentless force that wilts the plants on the windowsill and makes the very air shimmer. The opening is not a smile, it is a gaping, incandescent maw, a portal to an inferno. Inside, the bricks glow with a terrifying white-yellow intensity. Looking in for more than a second feels like staring into the sun. A blast of superheated air rushes out, scorching your eyebrows and making your eyes water. This oven is not your servant, it is your master, and it is a ravenous, insatiable beast. Its hunger for firewood is terrifying. You feed it constantly, log after log, a significant portion of your daily earnings turning to ash right before your eyes. The cost of fuel is a constant, gnawing anxiety. But the greatest fear is not the expense, it is the danger. Your entire home, your workshop, your storeroom, and the apartment where your family sleeps are all part of the same wooden-framed building. You are living inside a tinderbox, and at its center, you maintain a contained catastrophe. A single stray ember landing on a pile of wood shavings, a cracked flue in the chimney, a moment of inattention that is all it would take to lose everything. House fires were a constant, terrifying feature of medieval urban life. A fire starting in a bakery, with its abundant fuel and intense heat, could spread with horrifying speed, consuming not just your own home but an entire block, a whole neighborhood. You are acutely aware that the tool of your trade is also the most likely cause of your death. Every night, when the baking is done, the process of damping the oven is a ritual of extreme caution, raking out the coals, dousing them with bucket after bucket of precious water until you are absolutely certain that not a single spark remains. You lie in bed some nights, listening to the bricks of the oven ticking and groaning as they cool, your mind replaying every step, praying you were careful enough. Why this incredible risk? Why build your life, literally, around such a volatile and dangerous core? The logic was one of pure, brutal necessity and technological limitation. There was no other way. To bake bread in the quantities needed to sustain a business, you needed an oven capable of reaching and, more importantly, holding a very high temperature for a long period. This required a massive thermal reservoir, a huge mass of brick and stone that would soak up the heat from the fire and then radiate it back evenly. This is the principle of the retained heat oven. You fire it for hours, then sweep out all the ash and embers, and the heat stored in the masonry does the actual baking. Such a structure was enormously expensive to build and was, by its very nature, a permanent, immovable fixture. You couldn't just have the oven in a separate, safer building. Space in a crowded city, like Paris, was prohibitively expensive. Your workshop, shopfront, and living quarters had to be consolidated into one vertical, economical unit. The baker lived above the shop, not for quaintness, but for efficiency and security. The risk of fire was simply a non-negotiable part of the job description, a daily pact made with a monster of brick and flame. It was an accepted reality, much like disease or bad weather. You mitigated the risk as best you could. You prayed to Saint Honor and Saint Laurent, who was famously martyred on a gridiron, and you learned to sleep with one ear always listening for the crackle of rogue flames. While you tend to this fiery beast, managing the loading and unloading of dozens of loaves, the front of the shop requires its own master, someone with a different set of skills, who manages the flow of coin and customers with a practiced, steady hand. While you are wrestling with the peel, sliding loaves in and out of the oven's searing heat, another crucial part of your business is in full swing. At the front of the shop, dealing with the public, is your wife. The glamorous illusion of the baker's wife, as portrayed in romantic tales and pastoral art, is that of a helpful, demure partner. It is the rosy-cheeked woman who tidies the shop, wraps the loaves in clean linen, and offers a gentle smile to the customers. She might be seen sweeping the floor, minding the children, or perhaps kneading a small batch of dough at a secondary table. Her role is presented as supportive, domestic, and distinctly secondary to the great work being done by you, the master baker. She is the quiet presence in the background, the feminine touch that softens the masculine world of trade and labor. Her contribution is seen as love, not labor, help, not expertise. But as you glance over your shoulder, sweat stinging your eyes, you see the shocking reality. Your wife is not a gentle helper. She is the operational core of the entire enterprise. She is the chief financial officer, the head of sales, the logistics manager, and the director of customer relations. The small, worn wooden counter where she stands is not a quaint domestic space, it is her command center. While you have been wrestling with fire and flour, she has been running the business. Her mind is a finely tuned ledger of accounts. She knows exactly how much credit has been extended to which families, who is late on their payment, and who is likely to try and pay with clipped or debased coins. She handles the money with a speed and confidence that you lack, her sharp eyes spotting a fraudulent groat in a handful of change instantly. Remember those suspicious customers we talked about? She is the one on the front lines, deflecting their accusations with a practiced mixture of firm politeness and weary exasperation. She is the one who bears the brunt of their complaints and haggling. Her work didn't start this morning. It was she who, last night, tallied the day's earnings and calculated the razor-thin margin of profit. It was she who determined how much flour you could afford to buy at the market tomorrow, and how much wood needed to be ordered. While you know the art of baking, she knows the brutal mathematics of survival. She is also the master of the supply chain. She barters with the woman who sells eggs, haggles with the farmer who delivers milk for the richer cakes, and keeps a careful inventory of the salt, the honey, and the precious spices used for special holiday baking. Without her, the entire operation would grind to a halt within a week. You are the master of the product, but she is the master of the profit. And her work is not just financial and logistical. When the morning rush subsides, she is not resting. She is mending the children's clothes, preparing the family's meager midday meal, and cleaning the ever-present film of flour from your small living quarters upstairs. Her workday began when yours did, and it will end long after yours is over. So why was her role so consistently and completely undervalued, rendered invisible by the official histories and social perceptions of the time? The logic is rooted in the deeply patriarchal structure of medieval society and its legal framework. Under the law, a married woman had little to no independent economic identity. The business was legally yours, the property was in your name, and you were the member of the guild. She was, in the eyes of the world, an extension of you, her husband. Her labor was not considered work in the same way yours was. It was part of her domestic duty. The concept of a business partner in a marriage was simply not a recognized category. The guild, that fraternity of tailormeliers, was exclusively male. They celebrated the craft and skill of the baker, the man, while ignoring the essential economic and managerial labor of his wife, without whom that craft could not be translated into a viable living. The contributions were absorbed into the household, rendered as invisible as the air she breathed, the same flower-filled air that was slowly but surely settling into every corner of your shared home. The presence at the counter is so constant, so reliable, that it's easy to take for granted. But you know the truth. You are a partnership, a two-person team fighting for survival. You are the production department, and she is everything else. The public may call it your bakery, but you both know it belongs to her as much as it does to you. As the midday lull approaches, she will finally get a moment to sit, but there is no real escape. The shop, the bakehouse, and the home are all one, a cramped and chaotic space where the lines between work and life have been completely and utterly erased. The midday meal is a brief, functional affair. You and your wife eat standing up in the bakehouse, sharing a small loaf of yesterday's bread. You would never eat the fresh, profitable loaves with a bit of cheese and watered wine. Your children sit on the bottom step of the stairs, eating their own small portions, their faces already smudged with a mixture of dirt and flour. This is the closest you get to a family break. The glamorous illusion of living above the shop is one of cozy, integrated bliss. It's a romantic ideal, the artisan's life, where home and work are seamlessly blended. You imagine waking up to the smell of your own baking, your children playing happily near the warm oven, and a life of simple, wholesome convenience. The commute is just a flight of stairs. Everything you need, your family, your tools, your livelihood, is contained within your own four walls. It's a picture of self-contained harmony, a fortress of family industry against the outside world. But as you look around at your reality, the shocking truth is that living above the shop is not a convenience, it is a prison. There is no separation, no escape. The work is never left behind because you live inside it. The same flour dust that coats your bakehouse and your lungs, which we've tasted since you woke this morning, is the same dust that covers your bedsheets. You can never truly wash it away. Your clothes, your hair, your food, everything is impregnated with it. When you try to sleep at night, you are not in a peaceful bedroom, you are in the attic of a factory. You hear the scuttling of mice and rats in the walls, drawn by the endless supply of spilled flour and stray crumbs. They are your constant, unwelcome business partners. The battle against pests is relentless and largely futile. Cockroaches thrive in the warmth near the oven's foundation. Weevils can infest a sack of precious flour, turning your investment into a squirming, useless mass. Your home is not a sanctuary, it is a battleground. Privacy is a concept that does not exist for you. Your two-room apartment is directly above the workshop. Every shout from a customer, every argument over a price, every clang of a pan echoes upstairs. The stairs themselves, as we've seen, often led directly into the workspace, meaning there is no real front door, no buffer between your family's private life and the public chaos of the shop. Any mere guild inspector, a disgruntled customer, the city watch could effectively be in your living space with just a few steps. The heat from the oven, which we felt so intensely earlier, makes the rooms above it unbearably hot in the summer, turning your small home into a stifling sauna. In the winter, the rooms are drafty and cold, except for the floorboards directly above the oven, which are always strangely, unnervingly warm. You live your entire life to the rhythm of the bakery. It is not a home that happens to have a business attached. It is a business that grudgingly allows a small space for a family to exist within it. So why endure this? Why live in a state of perpetual dust, noise, and infestation? The logic, once again, is a cold calculation of economics and security. As we touched on with the oven's placement, it was simply too expensive to have a separate home. Rent in Paris was high, and every square foot had to be maximized for profit. The vertical integration of shop, workshop, and home was the standard model for almost all artisans, not just bakers. But for a baker, there was an added layer of logic, security. Flour was gold. A storeroom full of flour sacks was a tempting target for thieves. Firewood was also valuable and easily stolen. By living on the premises, you were the 24-hour security guard. You slept above your inventory, your senses always half alert for the sound of a forced shutter or a strange noise from below. The constant presence of your family was the most effective deterrent against theft. The lack of privacy and comfort was the price you paid for protecting your livelihood. This cramped, unsanitary, and exhausting living situation wasn't seen as a hardship to be avoided, but as a necessary and normal condition of the trade. It was simply the way things were. It was the cost of doing business in a world where a full sack of flour could be the difference between survival and starvation. And that deep, primal fear of loss, of having your livelihood stolen from you, was the very same fear that gave birth to one of the trade's most enduring and misunderstood traditions. As the afternoon wears on, a wealthy woman's servant arrives to collect a large order for a household feast. He counts the loaves carefully, not just once, but twice. You watch him, your expression neutral, but your heart beats a little faster. You count out his order, you do something that seems odd. For every dozen loaves he has purchased, you add one extra, for free. He nods, expecting this. This is the baker's dozen. The glamorous illusion surrounding this practice is that it's a charming act of generosity. It's the jolly baker's good-natured gesture, a folksy tradition of giving a little extra to a good customer. It has become a symbol of abundance and goodwill, a quaint relic from a time when shopkeepers were supposedly more generous and less obsessed with the bottom line. It's a warm, fuzzy marketing concept, suggesting that bakers are just naturally kind-hearted people who love to give away their product. But you don't add that 13th loaf out of the kindness of your heart. The shocking reality is that the baker's dozen is a tradition born not of generosity, but of pure, unadulterated fear. The laws against selling light bread were, as we've discussed, draconian. The public humiliation of being dragged on the hurdle was a terrifying prospect, but the financial penalties could be even worse. The single accusation from a powerful customer could trigger a visit from the guild's inspectors, and if they found even one batch of your bread to be underweight, the consequences were severe. And the system was notoriously unforgiving. Your scales might be slightly off. A loaf might lose a little more water weight than expected as it cooled. A particular batch of flour might not have absorbed water in the usual way. There were 100 small variables that could result in a loaf being fractionally underweight, with no malicious intent on your part. But the law made no distinction between a deliberate cheat and an honest mistake. To protect yourself from this ever-present threat, bakers invented the vantage loaf. By giving 13 or sometimes 14 loaves for the price of 12, you were creating a buffer. It was a form of self-preservation, an insurance policy against accidental error. If a customer were to weigh their entire purchase, the average weight of each loaf would almost certainly be at or above the legally mandated minimum. The extra loaf was a shield. It was a calculated business expense, factored into your pricing, designed to keep you out of the pillory. That extra loaf was the price of sleeping a little more soundly at night, knowing that you were safe from the most common and dangerous accusation that could be leveled against you. It was cheaper to give away a little bread than to pay a massive fine or lose your business entirely. So why were the punishments so severe that they spawned such a paranoid tradition? We've touched on the political need to keep bread prices stable, but the logic runs even deeper into the medieval psyche. Bread was not just food, it was the staff of life, an object with immense religious and social significance. In the Lord's Prayer, Christians prayed for their daily bread. It was a symbol of God's providence and a fundamental right. To cheat someone on bread was therefore not just a commercial crime, it was a moral and almost theological one. It was seen as a perversion of a sacred trust, an act of profound social evil that preyed upon the most basic need of the populace. The authorities, therefore, felt justified in using extreme, theatrical punishments. They weren't just punishing a fraudulent merchant, they were cleansing the community of a moral stain. The baker's hurdle wasn't just a deterrent, it was a public morality play, a ritual purification designed to reassure the public that the sacredness of their daily bread was being protected by the full, terrifying force of the law. You are not being generous, you are being terrorized into compliance. The smile you offer the servant as you hand over the heavy basket is a mask. Behind it is a mind constantly calculating risk, a mind that understands that the cost of one free loaf is infinitely smaller than the cost of a ruined reputation. Every transaction is a tightrope walk over a pit of potential ruin. And this pressure cooker of your daily life only intensifies when the calendar turns to a day of supposed rest and piety. The holy days, the feast days of the saints, are coming. For the rest of Paris, they are a time of celebration. For you, they are the busiest, most exhausting days of the entire year. The calendar hanging in the small space between the flour bins and the wall is marked with numerous saints' days and religious festivals. These are the holy days, the holidays that punctuate the relentless rhythm of the year. The glamorous illusion of these days is one of pious rest, joyous celebration, and communal feasting. For the rest of Paris, a major saint's day, like the feast of Saint Martin or the Assumption of Mary, means a day off from work. The city's mood shifts. Churches are filled, special masses are held, and the streets are alive with processions and festivities. Families gather for elaborate meals, sharing special foods and drinks in a spirit of collective cheer. It's a time when the community comes together to honor God and the saints, a welcome respite from the toil of everyday life. For the nobility, it's an occasion for grand banquets. For the commoner, it's a chance to eat and drink better than usual. The baker, you would think, would be at the heart of this, providing the festive breads that grace these happy tables. But as you stare at the next upcoming feast day on the calendar, you feel a familiar sense of dread creeping into your bones. The shocking reality for you is that a holiday is not a day of rest. It is a day of grueling, back-breaking, non-stop labor. Your workday, already punishingly long, will stretch into an 18 or even 20-hour marathon. The demand for bread doesn't just increase on these days. It explodes. Every household wants more bread, and not just the standard daily loaves. They want the special, enriched treats associated with the holiday. They want cakes sweetened with expensive honey, buns studded with rare and costly spices like cinnamon or cloves, and delicate pastries made with butter and eggs. These are intricate, time-consuming products that require more care and attention than your standard loaves. You will have to produce hundreds of them, all while still baking the city's normal supply of daily bread. Pressure is immense. The bakehouse, already hot, becomes a suffocating inferno as you and your wife work at a frantic pace. Sleep becomes a distant memory. You might catch an hour or two on a flour sack in the corner, but the work never truly stops in the 2 days leading up to the feast. You are a prisoner of the city's piety. While everyone else is preparing to celebrate, you are buried in duff, your arms aching from mixing and kneading, your eyes burning from the smoke and lack of sleep. The festive spirit in the streets outside is a world away from the desperate, sweat-soaked reality of your workshop. You are not a participant in the celebration. You are its exhausted, unseen engine. Failure is not an option. To not have the special cakes ready on time is to incur the wrath of dozens of families, to lose customers, and to earn a reputation for being unreliable. And why this cruel paradox? Why is a day of holy rest the most laborious day for the baker? The logic is twofold. First, the guild, that ever-present master, forbids you from baking on the holy day itself. All work must cease. This is meant to be a sign of respect, of public piety. But the city still wants its fresh bread and festive cakes for the feast day. This means you must produce 2 or 3 days' worth of product in a single, frantic burst of activity right before the holiday begins. The law intended to enforce piety instead creates a period of intense, almost inhuman, labor. It's a classic example of a rule creating the very problem it was meant to solve. Secondly, the economics of the feast day were too significant to ignore. The profits from selling these high-margin specialty items could be substantial. It was a chance to make up for the losses of a slow week or to get ahead on your guild fees. You couldn't afford not to do it. You were trapped in a cycle of supply and demand, driven by religious observance. The piety of your neighbors was, for you, a purely commercial opportunity wrapped in a shroud of physical agony. You remember last year's Easter rush. Your wife collapsed from exhaustion, and you had to finish the last batch of sweet cakes alone, your vision blurring, your hands shaking. You sold them all, made a good profit, and then spent the entirety of Easter Sunday in a stupor of sleep, too tired to even attend the mass you had worked so hard to provision. The entire system turns a sacred day into a brutal deadline. Its frantic work requires the best ingredients, especially the finest flour. But securing that flour, the very foundation of your existence, is another battle entirely, one fought not in the heat of the bakehouse, but in the treacherous, cutthroat world of the city's grain market. The profits from the recent Saints' Day frenzy are a small pile of coins now safely locked away, but your flour sacks are dangerously low. It is time to resupply, a task that fills you with more anxiety than any other. This is not a simple trip to a wholesaler. This is a journey into a world of suspicion, power plays, and veiled threats. The glamorous illusion of securing your raw materials is that of the discerning craftsman selecting his wares. You imagine yourself at a bustling, open market, running fine, clean grain through your experienced fingers, haggling cheerfully with a ruddy-faced farmer and choosing the perfect bushel for your needs. It's a picture of free commerce, of an open and honest exchange between the producer and the artisan, a wholesome link in the chain that brings food from the field to the city. The market is seen as the great equalizer, where any baker with coin in his pocket can buy the flour he needs. But as you make your way towards the central grain market at Les Hawleys, the shocking reality of the situation settles in. The grain trade is not a free market. It is a tightly controlled, viciously guarded monopoly. You are not a discerning craftsman making a choice. You are a supplicant, hoping to be granted the privilege of buying what you need at a price that won't bankrupt you. The King of France, through a series of royal edicts, has granted a select few powerful merchants the official measures to grant the exclusive right to buy grain from the countryside and sell it within the city of Paris. These men are not your friends. They are powerful figures, often connected to nobles or high-ranking city officials, and they have created a bottleneck through which all of the city's flour must pass. They can, and do, set the prices as they see fit. You approach their stalls with a deferential nod, your hat in your hand, knowing that they hold your entire livelihood in their grasp. The flour they sell is often of dubious quality. You have to inspect it carefully, plunging your hand deep into the sack to check for the dampness that signals the beginning of rot, sniffing it for the sour smell of mold, and rubbing it between your fingers to feel for the grit of added sand or chalk. To complain too loudly, however, is to risk being marked as a troublemaker. You might find that, mysteriously, the merchants are sold out the next time you come to buy. You are forced to accept what you are given, pay the price you are told, and swallow your resentment. This official system is designed to prevent hoarding and ensure a steady supply, but in reality, it creates the very conditions for corruption. The merchants themselves are often the worst hoarders, storing vast quantities of grain in their warehouses, waiting for a rumor of a bad harvest or a war to drive prices sky high. And this official corruption is precisely why a shadow economy exists. If you are desperate, or if you have the right connections, you can venture into the black market. This is a terrifying gamble. It involves meeting a man in a dark alley or a quiet tavern, a man who has smuggled grain into the city, bypassing the official merchants. The quality might be better, the price might be lower, but the risks are astronomical. If you are caught buying illegal grain, the guild will expel you, the city will fine you into oblivion, and you could even face prison. Your supplier, if caught, would likely be hanged as an example. Yet, sometimes, it is the only way to get flour that is good enough for those white loaves the nobles demand, or the only way to survive when the official prices become truly extortionate. You know bakers who do it, who live with the constant fear of a rival baker's anonymous tip-off or a chance encounter with the city watch. The why behind this suffocatingly control system is, once again, the politics of bread. The crown believed that centralizing the grain trade was the only way to prevent famine and the riots that inevitably followed. Granting monopolies to a few powerful men, the king could hold them directly responsible for keeping the city's granaries full. It was a strategy of outsourcing a critical state function to a quasi-private authority. The idea was to create order and stability. The reality, as you know from bitter experience, was that it created a system of institutionalized price gouging and corruption. The law intended to protect the populace from greedy bakers, but it delivered them, and you, into the hands of even greedier merchants. It was a system that looked orderly on paper, but was, in practice, a chaotic and unjust struggle for the most basic ingredient of life. You pay the merchant his outrageous price, heft the heavy sack onto your already aching back, and begin the long walk back to your shop, the coarse burlap scratching your neck. The flour inside feels like a bag of rocks, its weight both a comfort and a curse. You know that this very dust, the substance you fight for, bargain for, and build your life around, is also silently, invisibly, destroying you. You hoist the new sack of flour onto your shoulder, the familiar weight settling onto your tired muscles. The walk back through the crowded, muddy streets of Paris is slow. The burlap is rough against your neck, and with every step, a tiny, almost invisible puff of flour escapes, joining the cloud that perpetually surrounds you. The glamorous illusion of your trade is that it is a wholesome, hearty profession. The baker is often depicted as a robust, healthy figure, his strength built by the honest labor of kneading dough. He works with natural ingredients: flour, water, yeast, and is sustained by the fruits of his own labor. The bakehouse, with its warmth and the good smell of bread, seems like a healthy, life-affirming environment compared to the filth of the streets or the damp chill of a stonicutter's yard. It is a picture of rustic vitality, a life connected to the very staff of life. But as you arrive back at your shop and drop the sack to the floor with a heavy thud, a cloud of greyish dust billows up into the air. You inhale, as you always do, and you feel the shocking reality in your own chest. You have a persistent cough, a dry, hacking sound that is worst in the mornings. Your breathing is often shallow, and a deep breath can feel like a painful effort, as if your lungs are tightening. You are only 35 years old, but you have the respiration of an old man. This is the grim, unacknowledged secret of your profession, the baker's lung, or what would later be identified as a form of occupational asthma and pneumoconiosis. The very flour that is the source of your livelihood is also a slow, insidious poison. Every day, for hours on end, you are breathing in a fine aerosol of organic dust. Remember that ghostly apprentice in the bolting room. That is an extreme version of what you experience every single day. The fine particles of flour, as well as the microscopic spores from mold that can be present in the grain, coat the inside of your lungs. They are foreign bodies, and your immune system is in a state of constant, low-grade warfare against them. The initial symptoms are a runny nose and itchy eyes, which you dismiss as a constant head cold. But over years, the inflammation becomes chronic. The airways in your lungs become sensitized and constricted. The coughing fits become more frequent, the shortness of breath more pronounced. You see it in the older bakers in the guild, men in their 40s and 50s who are stooped and wheezing, who cannot climb a flight of stairs without stopping to gasp for air. They are being slowly, inexorably suffocated by their own craft. Why was this reality so completely ignored? Why did no one connect the baker's signature cough with his working environment? The logic lies in the complete absence of any concept of occupational health. In the medieval worldview, illness was primarily understood through the lens of humoral theory and imbalance of the four bodily humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bilia as a punishment from God or as the result of miasma or bad air from swamps and refuse. The idea that a specific substance encountered at work could cause a specific disease was entirely alien. A cough was a cough. It might be caused by a chill, by an excess of phlegm, or by divine displeasure. There was no framework for understanding that inhaling flour dust, year after year, was systematically destroying the delicate tissues of the lungs. The connection was invisible, and therefore, it did not exist. The slow, creeping nature of the illness also masked its cause. It wasn't a sudden injury, like a burn from the oven or a cut from a knife. It was a gradual decline, easily mistaken for the normal process of aging in a brutal era where life expectancy was short for everyone. So, you live with it. You chew on licorice root to soothe the tickle in your throat. You drink herbal infusions your wife prepares, hoping to clear your chest. You accept the cough and the wheezing as a normal part of being a baker, just as a stonemason accepts calloused hands and a blacksmith accepts the risk of burns. It is the price of the trade. The dust is your constant companion, from the moment you wake with its taste in your mouth to the moment you fall into an exhausted sleep, you're breathing a shallow rasp in the dark. It is the alpha and the omega of your existence. And you know, with a chilling certainty, that this dust you work so hard to acquire and protect can also become the focal point of a terror far more immediate than a slow decline in health. In a hungry city, a sack of flour isn't just a commodity, it's a spark waiting for a flame. Your humble loaves can become symbols, and your shop, a target. The day is growing long, and the shadows are stretching across the cobblestones. The flow of customers has dwindled to a trickle. You are tired, your body aching with a fatigue that feels ancient. A strange sound from the street makes you pause. It's a low murmur at first, but it's growing, punctuated by angry shouts. You peer cautiously through the wooden slats of your shop window. The crowd is gathering down the lane, their faces pinched with anger. The glamorous illusion of your position in society is that you are a vital, even beloved, figure. You are the provider of daily bread, a cornerstone of the community. In times of trouble, people should look to you for sustenance and stability. Your shop, with its warm oven and shelves of food, should be a sanctuary, a place of comfort in a harsh world. You are, in theory, on the side of the common people, a fellow tradesman just trying to make an honest living. You duck your head back inside, your heart beginning to pound. The shocking reality is that in times of hunger and unrest, you are not seen as a fellow victim, you are seen as the enemy. When the grain supply is thin, when prices are high, when rumours of hoarding spread, the baker is the most visible, accessible target for the people's rage. Don't see the powerful merchants of Les Halles or the king's distant tax collectors. They see you. You are the face of the system that is starving them. The bread in your shop window, which yesterday was a symbol of comfort, is suddenly transformed into a symbol of injustice. It is food they cannot afford, sustenance being withheld from their hungry children. Your bakery ceases to be a shop and becomes a fortress of privilege, and you, its hated gatekeeper. The shouting gets louder. You can make out the words now. Bread, bread, at a fair price. This is the cry that has preceded countless riots throughout the city's history. It is the sound of desperation boiling over into rage. You quickly bar the door and the heavy window shutter, plunging the shop into near darkness, lit only by the faint glow of the cooling oven. You and your wife move silently, your faces pale with fear. Hustle the children upstairs, telling them to be quiet, to hide. You remember the stories from other bakers, of shops being stormed by angry mobs, of windows smashed, doors broken down, the flour sacks being slashed open and strewn in the muddy street, a tragic waste born of pure fury. You remember the baker from the Faubourg Saint-Antoine who was dragged from his shop and nearly lynched before the city guard intervened, all because of a false rumour that he was holding back his best flour for the local monastery. Why does this happen? Why does the baker become the lightning rod for all of this social and economic fury? The logic is rooted in what historians call the moral economy of the crowd. For the common people of Paris, there was a deeply held, traditional belief that they had a right to affordable bread. It was not just a commodity to be bought and sold at market prices, it was a public utility, a right of subsistence. When prices rose beyond what they considered a just price, they saw it not as a matter of supply and demand, but as a moral failure, a crime being committed by greedy men. In their worldview, it was the baker's duty to sell them bread at this just price, regardless of what it cost him to produce it. When a riot occurred, they often did not see themselves as stealing. In their minds, they were reimposing the just price by force. They would storm a bakery, seize the loaves, and leave behind what they deemed to be the fair amount of coin. They were not looting, they were, in their own eyes, enforcing justice. Your personal financial ruin was irrelevant to this larger, communal sense of right and wrong. You stand in the darkness of your shop, your back pressed against the door, listening to the roar of the mob as it passes. The heavy wood vibrates with the pounding of angry fists on a neighbour's shutter. You are trapped, a prisoner in your own home, by the very people you feed every day. The flour dust in the air, your constant companion, suddenly feels heavier, more suffocating. Your profession places you on a razor's edge. You are squeezed from above by the guild and the merchants, and you are threatened from below by the desperate, hungry masses. You are a crucial cog in the machine of the city, but when the machine breaks down, you are the first part to be crushed. The mob eventually moves on, its anger dissipating down another street. The immediate danger has passed, but the fear lingers. As the last of the evening light fades, you are left to preside over the sad remains of the day's labour and the grim economy of what is left. The last rays of twilight are faded, and the city outside is surrendering to the deep, enveloping darkness of a medieval night. The riot has passed, leaving behind a tense silence and the lingering smell of fear. You light a single, precious tallow candle, its weak flame casting long, dancing shadows across the bakehouse. The day's main work is over. The shelves, once laden with a golden brown bounty, are now mostly bare. But your work is not quite done. There is a final, sombre task to perform. The glamorous illusion of a baker's day is that it ends with an empty shop, a sign of a successful day's trade. Every loaf is sold, every customer is satisfied, and you can close your shutters with the satisfaction of a job well done. The baker, in this fantasy, deals only in freshness and perfection. His product is always at its peak, and his day concludes with a clean slate, ready for the next morning's new beginning. But as you survey the leftover loaves on your counter, you are confronted with the shocking, and rather depressing, reality. You have not sold everything. There are a dozen or so loaves remaining. They are the ones that were slightly misshapen or a little too dark, or the last ones to come out of the oven and therefore missed the morning rush. They are no longer fresh. In a world without preservatives, bread stales with ruthless speed. What was a fragrant, crusty loaf this morning is now, just a few hours later, a hard, unappealing brick. This is yesterday's bread, before yesterday has even ended. And you preside over a grim, nocturnal economy based entirely on these leftovers. You can't afford to throw them away. Every loaf represents a cost in flour, firewood, and labour. So, you sell them. Just as you know they will. a different class of customer now begins to appear at your door. They do not come to the front window but to the small, discreet side door of the bakehouse, knocking softly so as not to draw attention. These are the city's poorest citizens, beggars, day laborers with no work, widows with too many children. They come under the cover of darkness, their faces etched with a mixture of hunger and shame. They cannot afford the fresh loaves of the morning, but they can afford this. You sell them the stale loaves for a fraction of the price, sometimes for only a single, tiny denier coin. The transaction is swift and silent. There is no haggling, no pleasantries. It is a stark and desperate exchange. You are not a generous benefactor, you are a purveyor of last resorts. You are the final stop before starvation. This is the bottom of the food chain, the salvage operation that allows you to recoup a tiny fraction of your costs. Why did this sad, secondary market exist? The logic is brutal and simple. It had to. There was no social safety net, no public assistance, no soup kitchens in the modern sense. For the vast number of Parisians living on the absolute margins of society, this stale bread was a primary source of calories. It was all they could afford. Your stale loaves, hard as they were, could be soaked in water or a thin soup to make them edible, providing just enough sustenance to survive another day. From your perspective, it was a necessary evil. The minuscule profit you made from these sales could mean the difference between breaking even and ending the day at a loss. It allowed you to convert a failed product into a few more essential coins. The entire system, while grim, was a horribly efficient, self-regulating mechanism. It ensured that almost nothing was wasted, and it provided a bare minimum level of sustenance for the city's most vulnerable, all without any official intervention or charity. It was a market born of pure, symbiotic desperation. You hand the last hard loaf to a woman whose face you can barely see in the gloom, her hand, thin and cold, brushing yours as she takes it. You close and bar the door, the sound of the heavy bolt echoing in the quiet bakehouse. This final act of the day is the most poignant. It is the moment you feel the immense, crushing weight of your city's social hierarchy most acutely. In the morning, you sold status and purity to the rich in the form of white bread. Throughout the day, you sold sustenance to the working folk. And now, in the dark, you have sold survival to the destitute. You have served every level of this complex, hungry society. You clean your hands, the flour and the grime of the day mixing into a grey paste. Your thoughts turn to the future, to your son sleeping upstairs, breathing in the flour-dusted air. You think of the legacy you are building, and a deep, weary sadness settles over you. The candle sputters, its small flame barely holding back the tide of darkness in the now quiet bakehouse. Every muscle in your body screams with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. You have completed the cycle, the pre-dawn rising, the battle with the oven, the dance with the duff, the performance for the customers, and the final, somber transactions of the night. Now, all that is left is to climb the stairs to your small apartment, to your lumpy bed, for a few precious hours of sleep before it all begins again. The glamorous illusion of your life's work is that you are building a legacy. You are a master craftsman, the head of a respected family business. You are passing down a noble and vital trade to your son, ensuring the family name and prosperity continue for another generation. To hand over the bakery to your heir is the crowning achievement of your life, a testament to your hard work and success. It's a romantic vision of dynastic pride, of a father bestowing a precious gift upon his child. But as you drag yourself up the creaking wooden stairs, you glimpse your son asleep on his straw pallet. His small face is peaceful in the faint moonlight filtering through the shuttered window. And in that moment, you are struck by the shocking and heartbreaking reality of your legacy. You are not handing your son a gift, you are handing him a life sentence. The legacy you are building with your own sweat and blood is a cage, forged from flour and fire. You are training him to take your place in this relentless, punishing cycle. Already, he helps with small tasks. He learns to stack firewood, to sift flour, to sweep the floors. He is learning the smells, the sounds, and the rhythms of the bakehouse. He is breathing the same dust that settles in your lungs. The baker's lung we know is already beginning its slow work on him. You are teaching him the trade, yes, but you are also condemning him to the same aching back, the same chapped hands, the same constant anxiety. You look at your own hands in the dim light. They are the hands of an old man, the knuckles swollen, the skin cracked and permanently stained with flour and soot. You see the future of your son's hands in your own. You see his future in your own wariness. He will be bound to the same guild, beholden to the same arrogant merchants. He will live in fear of the same inspectors and the same mob. He will marry a woman who will have to be as strong and resilient as your own wife, her contributions just as vital and just as invisible. He will live and die in this same cramped building, his world shrinking until it is contained within these four walls. Your greatest hope for his future is that he will simply endure the same hardships you have. Survival is the highest form of success you can imagine for him. And why? Why is this your only hope for him? Why not wish for him to become a scholar, a priest, a merchant with soft hands and clean clothes? The logic is rooted in the rigid social structure of the medieval world. Social mobility was incredibly rare. You were, for the most part, born into your station. A baker's son became a baker. A nobleman's son became a nobleman. The guild system, which Waves seen as a cage, was also a form of protection. Leaving the trade would mean abandoning the only community, the only safety net, however flawed, that your family had. To apprentice him to another trade would require money and connections you simply do not possess. To send him to the church would be an option, but it would mean losing him, and losing the future of the bakery. The bakery is your only significant asset, the only inheritance you can give him. To abandon it would be to cast the family into poverty and uncertainty. Your desire to pass on the trade is not just about tradition. It is a pragmatic, if tragic, choice made from a very limited set of options. You are chaining him to this life, because it is the only life you can secure for him. It is a legacy of survival, not of ambition. You finally lie down on your bed, the straw mattress rustling beneath you. You close your eyes, but the darkness behind your eyelids is filled with the faint, ghostly image of flour dust swirling in a stray sunbeam. It is the central, inescapable fact of your life. It was the first thing you tasted this morning, and it is the last thing you see in your mind's eye at night. It is your livelihood, your poison, your legacy. The phantom taste of it is on your tongue as you begin to drift away, your body surrendering to a sleep that is less a rest and more a brief, temporary ceasefire in a war that will begin again in just a few short hours. The world of the Parisian baker, with all its heat and its dust, begins to soften at the edges now. Sharp anxieties of the day, the fear of the mob, the weight of the flour sacks, all begin to dissolve into the quiet of the night. The city outside is asleep, and its endless hunger is, for a few precious hours, finally sated. The great brick oven downstairs is no longer a roaring monster, but a warm, sleeping beast, its bricks ticking softly as they release the last of their fiery energy into the cool night air. The sounds of the day have faded, replaced by the soft whisper of your own breathing, a rhythm that will carry you through the night. Let the details of this life, the grit and the toil, become blurry and indistinct. Allow the story to recede, leaving behind only a sense of peace, a feeling of rest well earned. There is nothing more to do today. No more duff to knead, no more customers to face. There is only this quiet moment, this gentle descent into a deep and untroubled slumber, where the taste of flour finally, mercifully, disappears from your tongue. End of script. Sweet dreams.